Okay, okay. Uh, okay, so yesterday we had a quick look into what the continuum hypothesis is. So essentially, if you have a domain like this, right, and if you have a lot of molecules in this, so the interrogation window, so the whole idea was about choosing an interrogation window. So if the interrogation window is too large, you are not able to capture any local variations. If the interrogation window is too small, you will end up with a lot of fluctuations in the properties. So what is the basis for the choice? So the question is, what is the basis for this particular window choice? So suppose let us consider gases. Actually, even before considering gases, liquids. So liquids have very rapid collisions and liquids have a high density. So liquids typically have a high density. So if you consider water molecules, the size of the water molecules are typically 0.3 no 0.3 nanometer, if I'm not mistaken. So in that case, the distance between multiple molecules is quite small, and it is of the order of 0.1 nanometer. Okay, the distance between water molecules is very small. So a choice of an interrogation window of 10 nanometer has statistically large number of molecules. Okay, this is the important thing, to have statistically large number of molecules, because the distances are quite small, so they are just wiggling around. Okay, but what about gases? So gases have a large distance between each of them. So if you have one gas molecule over here, so the distance traveled by one gas molecule before colliding with another is called as lambda, or the mean free path. Okay, so the interrogation window should be significantly larger. So if I call the length of the interrogation window as L, so the length should be sufficiently larger than the mean free path, but the length of the interrogation window must be sufficiently smaller than the domain length. So if the domain length is this, so you cannot allow your interrogation window to be much or equal to the size of the domain. So the interrogation window must encompass statistically large number of molecules. So in the case of gases, L by lambda, rather lambda by L. This number is called as the Knudsen number. It is very important to assess whether a flow is free molecular flow or whether a flow is continuum flow. Okay. So if the mean free path is larger, so let us call this as Kn. So if Kn is larger than 1, it means that the mean free path is larger than the interrogation window, and I am no longer sort of considering the system as a continuum. I will consider the system to be a free molecular flow. So I have to do a molecular dynamics basis for this. However, if the Knudsen number is quite small, then the mean free path is quite small. So meaning before encountering it encounters a molecule before it encounters the boundary wall. Okay, so the boundary wall is at a distance L, but the mean free path is much smaller than it, meaning it is encountering another molecule before it exits the domain. So just think about it. It's very easy to understand what a continuum flow will be for a gas and what a free molecular flow will be for a gas. And for liquids, typically you have the continuum hypothesis true until and unless the domain itself becomes as small as say 3 nanometers. Okay, if the domain itself becomes 3 nanometers, you know that the size of the water dipole is also going to be 0.3 nanometers. So there are only 10 water dipoles in that gap. So now you may ask, where on earth are you gonna get channels of width 3 nanometers? So who can tell me where you can find channels of dimensions of 3 nanometers? It can be, it may not be just a channel, it can be a tube also. It can be a tube also. So the diameter of this will be 3 nanometers. Capillary tube. No, capillary tubes are still quite large. The carbon nanotube. Exactly. So good. So carbon nanotube is one answer. Anything else? Blood vessels. Blood vessels are still hundreds of microns. So the transport between cell walls. Okay. So there is something called as, I mean, at the cell wall, there is something which allows for, so there are these lipids. Okay. So when you have transport of nutrients to and fro from a wall, so suppose a sodium ion is trying to go in, the gap between these cell walls, so there are many such lipid layers, bilayers. So anyone who has done biology will realize what I'm talking about. But don't worry if you don't know it. So there are lipid bilayers at cell wall, or you can look it up later. And the passage of ions, potassium and sodium. So there is something called as a sodium potassium pump, and that happens across widths of 3 nanometer. But going beyond these natural examples, nowadays there are fabrication techniques. So in your first year, you might have done some fabrication, right? Can you tell me the smallest feature that you fabricated? So I think on the lathe we have done some work with considerably low, I mean high resolution. Okay, what was it? It was a thread actually. Okay. Okay, so you did some. You have done some drilling on a lathe, right? So in the tailstock you attach a drill and then you do the thing. So drill bits can be as small as 300 micrometer or even 100 micrometer. Okay. So below 100 micrometer you cannot do on drilling, but I think you have done something called as electrode discharge machining. Yes, sir. So this technique allows you to go up to say tens of microns, but now there are techniques called as focused ion beam machining. So using an ionic beam, you are able to, so suppose this is my job, my blank, and then you have a focused ion beam which sort of acts at this spot. And upon sufficient intensity, it starts to remove away material, okay, and then across this plate, it will create a channel. So this is called as focused ion beam machining. Okay. There is something else which is called as focused electron beam machining. So as you can imagine, it all depends on the energy of the incipient ion or electron, and it also depends on the scattering wavelengths and all this. So it's all physics driven. Okay. So any questions so far on continuum hypothesis and all this? So if not, let's proceed with the next section that we want to study, which is properties of fluids. So the most important property of a fluid is pressure. Okay, so if you have a given object such as this, pressure always pressure is a compressive force acting on the area, so it always acts normal to the surface and it acts in an inward direction. So it is always normal to the surface and it acts always inwards. So meaning the pressure is always compressive in nature. So if you have a balloon like this, okay, it will act normal to the surface. So what do you mean by normal to the surface? I'm intuitively showing you the arrows. It's sort of you understand, okay, it's normal to the surface, but how do you actually quantify whether something is normal to the surface? Who can tell me? Along the surface? Good. So good. So if you have a given surface like this, you can find out the surface area vector whose direction will be n and magnitude will be a. So it's the area vector will actually be the magnitude a multiplied by the unit vector n. So if the pressure is collinear with this, rather not if the pressure is always collinear with this. Okay, good. So pressure always acts normal to the fluid. Good. So the next important property is going to be temperature. Temperature is a very important property of a fluid. I mean, it's an important property of a solid as well. Okay. So temperature, so like we have already studied, it is actually a macroscopic manifestation of kinetic energy. Okay. So why is temperature so important for us to study in fluid mechanics? Because temperature can give rise in local variations in density, viscosity, okay, even pressure. So can you tell me one situation where temperature leads to an alteration in flow? Leads to a flow, in fact. Can you? So this is the El Nino flow, I think. No, no. So that is completely a geophysical. I mean, you have. Metal flows from heat emitter. Okay, so okay, so you let me write down. So El Nino, actually not just El Nino, any geophysical phenomenon. Okay, atmospheric geophysical phenomenon. So apart from that, like you said, casting, so liquid metals, good. That is also a very good example because initially the liquid has a very high degree of superheat, and then as and when the metal solidifies, the properties keep changing, and eventually it becomes a solid. And if you are not able to control the rate of loss of heat from the solid, you will have various kinds of defects, right? But the most obvious thing which even your house members who are not so scientifically inclined can answer, is when you light up an agarbatti, or what they call as an incense stick, right? So if you have one of those conical incense sticks, when you light this, you can see the smoke rising and it becomes like a vortex and it starts doing all sorts of crazy things. So these kind of flows are driven solely by the fact that the density of hot air is light. So density of air in this region is going to be lighter than the density of the ambient air. So it rises, okay? So that leads to buoyancy driven flows. So it's a very important class of flows, and these kind of things are actually responsible for our understanding of wind patterns, atmospheric fluid dynamics, and so on. Okay? So temperature is a very important thing, and we'll look into slightly more detail about the influence of temperature. It's not entirely obvious. Okay. Density. Density is a very important fluid property. Now, what is density? It is the macroscopic manifestation of what? Anyone? Something. The number of molecules present in a investigation window. So average number of molecules. Okay. So density can depend on temperature and pressure. So the symbol is rho. So del rho del T, 1 by T del rho del T. You can identify this as what? You have done this in your JE or something. What is 1 by rho del T? It is equal to minus 1 by T del V del T, where V is the volume. So this is the coefficient of thermal expansion. Do you remember?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. And this is what give rise to all those buoyancy driven effects. The fact that density changes with temperature. Okay. So this is nothing but a measure of how density changes with temperature. Okay, it can also change with pressure. So 1 upon P del rho del P. What is this? Who can tell me? Sorry, it should be 1 upon, oh, this should be 1 upon rho del T. Okay, this should be rho. It is always the unit of whatever is on top. But you get my point. So then you have 1 upon rho del P. So who can tell me what this entity is? It is the rate of change of density with pressure, which is going to be nothing but 1 upon V del V del P. The volume, V is the volume. So this is nothing but the bulk expansion coefficient. Because how volume changes with pressure. So if I have a balloon and if I act a large pressure upon this balloon, then obviously the balloon will contract, right? So that is why it is like the bulk expansion or contraction coefficient. You agree? Any doubt in this? Okay, so fluid is said to be incompressible. What do you mean by a fluid being incompressible? That even upon changing the pressure, the density does not change a lot. If rho does not change appreciably, upon application of pressure, then the fluid is said to be incompressible. And this is a very classic Viva question, right? That a flow can be incompressible or a fluid can be incompressible. The criterion for a flow to be incompressible is something else completely. But if someone asks you whether a fluid is incompressible or not, don't go ahead and say that the divergence of velocity is zero. So this is the condition for an incompressible flow. There is a difference between flow and a fluid. Okay, it's not the same. So fluid is incompressible. A fluid being incompressible is the property, is a physical property of the fluid. But a flow being incompressible is not a physical property of the fluid, but it is a physical property of the flow. Okay, I hope it is clear. Now let us proceed with the properties of fluids. There is something called as, okay, before even going there, we just spoke briefly about density being a function of temperature and pressure. So can you tell me, for gases, what is the relationship between density, pressure and temperature? So P equal to rho RT is the relationship for an ideal gas. Very good. And in general, there is some kind of equation of state. So that is called as an equation of state, right? So there is some kind of equation of state which relates all these properties. Good. So we're not going to go into much detail about all this because see, I mean, in the end, we are doing engineering fluid mechanics and not statistical fluid mechanics. So viscosity. Let us first quickly look at what sort of viscosity intuitively means. Imagine you have a fluid element like this, right? And you apply some kind of differential, not differential, you apply some shear stress over here. Okay. So the shear stress tau will lead to a deformation of the fluid element. So let me call this as delta y, this angle as delta theta. Okay. So for small values of shear stress, I mean, for small meaning relatively small, the shear stress is sort of observed to bear a linear relationship between the change in strain. So, what is the change in strain? It is going to be the change in angle delta theta upon time. So, in solid mechanics, this equivalent statement would have been the application of a stress leads to a certain strain. Okay. So the equivalent thing of this would be a linear relationship between stress and strain. Similarly, there is a linear relationship between stress and rate of strain because in fluid mechanics, there is no concept of statics. It's a rate process. As long as you keep applying shear stress, this element will keep on deforming. Okay. So if it is continuously deforming, the delta theta will continuously change. But if tau is constant, the rate of change of delta theta will be constant. Okay, delta theta will continuously change, but del theta del t will be like a constant. So application of tau is linearly proportional to this. Now from this particular geometry, let me erase this extraneous part. Mm, So this is delta theta. So tan of delta theta, okay, what is it going to be? So if the shear stress causes a velocity u at this particular surface, Okay, if the shear stress causes a particular velocity u, so it will be, so this delta theta will be equal to this distance. So what will be this distance? It will be u delta t. Actually, it is not just u that is of concern, it is the u relative to this u. So if both this surface and this surface have the same velocity, the element will not deform. Meaning, if this velocity and this velocity are identical, then this red element will simply move without changing its shape. But if this velocity is lower and this velocity is higher, then this element face will move a smaller distance compared to this element face. So absolute velocities are not responsible for deformation. So the gradient or the relative velocity, so delta u is responsible for deformation. Okay, it's like taking a ball and taking the ball in your hand and moving the ball, so it does not deform. But if you hold the ball over here and try to move this ball, it will start deforming. So relative velocity always leads to deformation. So instead of having u over here, let us have delta u, and this velocity goes. So it's almost as if this top face has a relative velocity delta u with respect to the bottom face. So tan delta theta will be equal to delta u multiplied by delta t, because the distance it will travel will be equal to the relative velocity multiplied by time divided by delta y. Now all the definitions are done for instantaneous deformation. So instantaneously, because tan delta theta will be small, I can write tan delta theta as delta theta, and I can take the delta t from the right hand side to the left hand side, and this will be equal to delta u by delta y. So ultimately, if I sort of represent this discrete equation in terms of derivatives, del theta del t is equal to del u del y. So if we substitute this relationship inside the linear relationship between stress and rate of strain, what do we have? Del theta, so rather not del theta, tau is proportional to del u by del y, meaning the stress is linearly proportional to the gradient of velocity, the spatial gradient of velocity. So del u del y is like the gradient of velocity. I mean, we'll get into the exact details of this. This is just a one-dimensional example. So it's called as a spatial gradient of velocity. So the proportionality can be written as some constant times del u del y, and this thing you can identify as Newton's law of viscosity. Okay, so it means that the shear stress at the top surface will be equal to some viscosity times the gradient of velocity. So suppose I apply a shear stress of 1 Pascal, and if this shear stress leads to a gradient in velocity like this. So this is a very small velocity gradient, and if it leads to, so I hope you can understand that this is the velocity and this is the delta y. And if I have another fluid where application of 1 Pascal stress leads to a velocity gradient like this. Okay, this is a large velocity gradient. In which case do you think the viscosity is larger? The red case or the blue case? Excellent. So the blue case has a larger viscosity because the viscosity resists the setting up of a velocity. So it's like you take a jar of honey, you try to stir it with a spoon. So you're gonna face a lot of difficulty to set up a velocity gradient. Okay, but if you take a spoon and try to mix water, you can immediately do it. Meaning the viscosity sort of resists the creation of velocity gradients. Okay, so it's a slightly different perspective than what you might have studied.
So,
Yes,
how did you say that the shear stress is proportional to the rate of change of strain?
good question. So,
Yes.
so that particular this particular relationship is termed as a constitutive, not a constitutive relationship. It is from basic observations. It has no sort of, so it's like a observation that you see from experiments, and it has no sort of sanctity. So what causes the sanctity of this relationship is if you make this particular assumption, okay, and if you derive an entire elaborate theory based on this assumption, ultimately if you see that the theoretical predictions match with experimental observations, you can say that this observation is correct, this assumption is correct. So similar assumptions also exist. So it's a very good question. So heat flux, I don't know if you have read this, is proportional to the gradient of temperature. Okay, and this linearity between heat flux and temperature gradient, the equality, if it becomes equal to del t del x, then this is called as the Fourier law, the Fourier law of heat conduction. Similarly, mass transfer, the mass flux is proportional to the linearly proportional to the gradient in concentration. And if you write this as an equality, the equality sign is the diffusion coefficient. The equality constant is the diffusion coefficient, and this law is called as the Fick's law of diffusion. But does it mean that all diffusion processes obey the Fick's law, or all heat transfer processes obey Fourier law? No, the answer is no. When the fluxes are not very high, rather when the gradients are not very high, then they have a linear relationship between flux and the gradient. Okay, linear relationship between flux and gradient is not always true, but you can make an assumption that it is true and proceed. In fact, there was a scientist called as Lars Onsager who had proposed reciprocal theorem which relates thermodynamic flux with thermodynamic force. So in his way of writing, this Q is called a thermodynamic force and del T del X is called a thermodynamic flux. So there is a linear relationship. This is something which he proved and won the Nobel Prize for it. Okay. So you are right. It need not have a linear relationship. And when stress does not linearly depend on the rate of change of strain, then these kind of fluids are no longer called as Newtonian fluids. So under the assumption of this linearity, we obtained this relationship. This is called as the Newton's law of viscosity. If this relationship itself fails, if the linearity relationship itself fails, then this relationship will also not be valid, and those kinds of fluids are called as non-Newtonian fluids. So it's a very good question.
Sir, one example of non-Newtonian fluid is cornstarch in water.
Cornstarch in water, toothpaste, saliva. Okay, there are innumerable examples. But look, here's the interesting thing. Just because you may think that the fluid is non-Newtonian does not really hold a physical significance. It actually also depends on the rate of strain that you induce in the fluid. So if you take a cornstarch and so I think you might have seen that experiment where you take a bowl of cornstarch and water, and if you suddenly hit that bowl of cornstarch and water, it will behave like a solid object, meaning the viscosity when you have a large rate of strain becomes infinite. Not infinite, but it becomes very large, right? This is your observation. But if you take your finger and gently poke the bowl containing cornstarch and water, it will behave like a liquid. So whether or not a fluid will have a Newtonian behavior or a non-Newtonian behavior will actually depend on the rate of strain. For small rates of strain, tau will always and most likely be linearly dependent on rate of strain. But when the rate of strain becomes high, there will be non-linear effects coming into the picture, and the manifestation of those non-linear effects is a non-linear dependency of tau on the velocity gradient, and that is true for non-Newtonian fluids. Okay, so I give you an overall perspective. uh, Similarly, when the fluxes when the gradients are large, then this no longer becomes Fourier law, it becomes a non-linear heat conduction. Similarly, when the gradient of concentration is also quite large, then it no longer remains as Fick's law, it becomes some non-linear diffusion process. Okay, let's proceed with a very important thing, which is temperature dependency of viscosity. So let us look at why viscosity sort of exists in the first place. So it is like if you have a bunch of molecules, if you are trying to shear, so if you have this local velocity as 0 and this velocity as u, you're trying to roll over a bunch of particles over the other particles. Okay, essentially what you are causing is you are causing dissipation. So the attraction between molecules, if the attraction between the molecules is large, then you will sort of have to have a larger velocity gradient to overcome these attraction bonds and cause them to roll. You agree? So large molecular attraction means larger shear required to cause gradient. So if you increase the temperature of the system, increasing the temperature leads to a reduction in the attractive. Okay, please mute your mic. So in temperature increase leads to a reduction in intermolecular attraction. Okay, it leads to a reduction, meaning that in order to cause the same velocity gradient, you will not require such a high shear force, and hence the viscosity reduces as temperature increases. But this is only true for liquids. Guys, please mute your mic. Come on. But what about gases? So if you have a bunch of gas molecules like this, and now ask the question, what is causing dissipation in gases? So the main question is, what happened? Someone is washing their clothes or what? Okay, let me mute everyone. Hmm. Sorry guys, it had to be done. I don't like muting everyone. So what is causing dissipation in gases? So the primary cause of dissipation in gases is the intermolecular collision. So if the molecule has some kinetic energy, say E, so each collision that it encounters with another gas molecule will lead to a reduction in kinetic energy. So if I plot the average kinetic energy, and if the system has viscosity, meaning if the system has viscosity, it will continuously lead to a dissipation of energy. So energy will eventually go down with time. So viscosity obviously leads to a dissipation of energy, and it is obviously the same for fluids also. Okay. So if you take a very viscous fluid and try to create velocity gradients, that whole thing becomes hot, meaning there is heat dissipation. So for gases, collisions are what cause dissipation. So if temperature of the gas increases, what happens to the viscosity? Actually, the number of collisions between gas molecule actually increases. Okay. So number of collisions, it increases. So if the number of collisions increases, it leads to a larger dissipation of energy, and hence for gases, if you increase temperature, the viscosity actually increases, and this is counterintuitive to the phenomena for liquids. So for liquids, as the temperature increases, viscosity decreases, but for gases, as the temperature increases, the viscosity also increases. So if you plot the viscosity versus temperature, okay, yeah.
How can we relate between viscosity and energy?
So actually, you are not trying to relate between viscosity and energy. You are trying to relate viscosity with the rate of change of energy. Okay, you consider you have a pool of honey and you take a spoon and you try to stir the honey. Okay, now initially you will see some velocity in the honey, and that velocity will quickly dissipate, meaning you are losing energy. Okay, so if you have a highly viscous medium, whatever energy you impart to that medium by means of kinetic energy, that energy will be dissipated as heat. Okay, so viscosity has a sort of statistical relationship with the rate of change of energy. I mean, the entire mathematics hopefully we will be able to cover sometime in the future, but for now that physical insight is good enough. So for gases, as temperature increases, viscosity increases. For liquids, as temperature increases, viscosity decreases. But there can be substances which change state. So initially they can be liquid like this, and then they can become gases. So it can happen like this. So I hope it is clear how the effect of how the temperature affects viscosity. And this is a very favorite Viva question. When you encounter the fifth year Viva or fourth year Viva, someone or the other, maybe I will ask the same question. Okay? So I hope you will not answer it incorrectly. So yes, that's it. We've considered basic properties of fluid. Let me quickly discuss about surface tension. I mean, I really want to discuss surface tension in a different video. So actually, these videos I have to make an entire set of new videos for telecasting on a TV channel, on a DTH channel. So anyway, I have to make the videos so you can benefit from those videos as well. So let us quickly look at surface tension. So what do you understand by surface tension? See, it comprises of two words, surface and tension. So what is surface tension? So it is the tension at the surface. Okay. So if you have a flat sheet or a flat layer, so this layer is always in tension, and this force per unit area which is creating the tension is called as the surface tension. So as you can imagine, if you have a surface which always has forces causing a tension in that surface. So it's like a piece of cloth and you try to pull that piece of cloth. That is called a surface tension. Okay. So surface tension causes various observations of capillary rise, of energy minimization, of droplet formation. So ever wondered why honeycombs of bees have that hexagonal pattern? They have that hexagon pattern, right? Ever wondered why that happens?
Maximum surface area.
Actually, it is the minimum energy given maximum volume storage. Okay. So actually, these are not initially hexagons. These are initially circles. And because if you coalesce two neighboring circles, it starts to look like a hexagon. Anyway, we will discuss this in more elaborate details in a separate video. This may not be a part of your syllabus. I'll whatever we are discussing through Microsoft Teams will be a part of syllabus, and whatever I will upload on YouTube or whatever, that is just like a supplementary video, and it may or may not be a part of your syllabus. Okay. Acha, before going, I just want to quickly touch upon the non-Newtonian fluids that someone had asked. So cornstarch, okay, so water cornstarch, you can actually do the experiment at home. Okay, just google it, you will see. So cornstarch water, so the shear stress in time, if you have a constant rate of strain, constant rate of strain meaning the velocity gradient you're trying to keep constant. Okay, so what happens to that, the or constant rate of strain is also tantamount to constant del theta del t. In fact, let me plot it as this. I will send you some handouts, don't worry about it. And these are not really useful for your course, but I thought you just should know. So tau, if it is linear with del, if it has a linear relationship with del theta del t, then this particular curve is called as a Newtonian fluid. Okay, if it behaves like this, so this fluid is called as a dilatant fluid, meaning that as rate of strain increases, the shear stress increases. Okay, for the same rate of strain, the shear stress increases, and this kind of fluid is called as a pseudoplastic fluid. Meaning that as the rate of strain increases, the tau decreases. So tau is some constant times del theta del t raised to some power. If the power is equal to 1, you get linear relationship. If the power is larger than 1, you get a dilatant relationship. If the power is less than 1, you get a pseudoplastic relationship. Okay, but in all these curves, if you zoom into zones of low del theta del t, you can sort of make an approximate. So if you zoom here, okay, it will, if this segment will sort of start looking linear. This curve is quite large usually. Okay, this curvature of the curve is quite large usually, and hence for small values of del theta del t, it will almost appear to be linear, and hence what I had said earlier, that regardless of the kind of fluid, it actually depends strongly on the rate of strain. If you have a high rate of strain, you will see non-Newtonian behavior. If you have low rate of strain, you will see Newtonian behavior. So you can do that experiment. You can take cornstarch in water, you punch it, you will feel the viscosity has gone up significantly. But if you gently poke it, you will see that okay, nothing special happens. It will feel like water. Okay. So this is the fantastic thing about fluid mechanics. It's dependent strongly on rate of strain, and rate of strain is strongly dependent on velocity gradient. So it's not a subject where you always have linear relationships. It's a subject where the flow can cause a high rate of strain in some regions, causing the fluid to behave wildly in certain spots and behave mildly in certain other spots. Okay, so with this we end this particular video or lecture, as you whatever you may try to call. I'll stop my recording